Well, hello there, and welcome to my kitchen table. The kitchen table, a place in most homes where we can sit with family and friends and just talk for hours. That's what I do. Only I actually talk to myself on a screen, and to you guys, of course. I bought a t-shirt not so long ago. Actually, it was only a couple of weeks ago. When my therapist seen it, she did laugh because it says, "Sometimes I talk to myself, and we both laugh." Couldn't resist it. Let's see where we're off to today. We are off to Ipswich, which is a town in Suffolk. Suffolk is a county in the eastern area of England. It has a population of around 137,000 and it sits on the River Orwell. On the waterfront, you see, I live in a city that's got a huge waterfront because we're on the River Mersey. And most waterfronts, they look the same. I swear they use the same plans and just make them bigger or smaller depending on where they're going. But the waterfront is lined with shops, restaurants, pubs, clubs, bars, uh, coffee establishments, galleries, museums. You don't get the idea? Yeah. And it's the same in Ipswich. They also have the 19th century old custom house, which actually tells of the town's maritime history. So if you're into maritime history, might be well worth a visit. So, now that you know a little bit about Ipswich, take a seat and I'll tell you a story. Stephen Gerald James Wright. Yes, that's his full name. But we're going to be calling him or refer to him as Steve Wright because that's how he's known. This is not the Steve Wright that was a BBC radio disc jockey. This is not the Steve Wright who's a novelist, or the mountain climber, or the windsurfer, or any other of the Steve Wrights that pop up on Google when you do a search for the name. Try it. No, this one was born on the 24th of April 1958, and he's an English serial killer. He's also got the name of the Suffolk Strangler. He's currently serving a whole life term for the murder of 5 women who worked in Ipswich, in Suffolk. A whole life term is what we call in England life without parole. He will die in prison for what he did. Steve Wright was born in the Norfolk village of Erpingham, the second of 4 children to military policeman Conrad, his dad, and veterinary nurse Patricia, his mum. He's got a brother and 2 sisters, so 4 kids. While his dad was working in the military, you know what military families are like, they kind of like travel around a fair bit. And they lived in such diverse places as Malta and Singapore. I don't think you could actually, if there was a diversity scale with regards to places to live, Malta would be on one end and Singapore would be on the other, I think. They're just so different. That must have been so exciting, especially for the kids. Wright's mother actually left the family in 1964. He was only 6. His father divorced his mother in 1978. His parents both remarried, and Wright and his siblings actually lived with their father, and they gained a half-brother and a half-sister via his father and his new wife, Valerie. He left school at the age of 16, which is it's normal to do that in England, in the UK. The General Certificate of Secondary Education, or GCSE, is actually completed at the age of 16 when you sit down in a big room full of lots of people and take examinations. Horrendous times. I'm so glad they're over. After the GCSEs, you're actually legally allowed, permitted to leave school. If you want to advance your education, you're quite welcome to, and you can stay on in what we used to call 6th form, but it's now years 12 and 13, and do A-levels. After that, it's college or university, depending on how far you want to go. Soon after he left school, he joined the Merchant Navy and he became a chef on the cross-channel ferries sailing from Felixstowe in Suffolk. Cross-channel ferries, they're not the regular, ferry across the Mersey. These are huge car ferries that take people to mainland Europe on holiday and things like that. And they carry a lot of cars as well. In 1978, at the age of 20, he married Angela O'Donovan in Milford Haven, which is in Pembrokeshire in Wales. That's still in the UK, it's just a different country. And it's amazing. Amazingly beautiful. I don't think I've ever seen a bad area of Wales, honestly. Do you get stuck in traffic and you kind of like turn your head to the right and go, wow. That's what it's like driving through Wales. So yeah, they had a son together and they called him Michael. But the couple separated in 1987 and got a divorce quite soon after. Wright actually became a steward on the ocean liner, the Queen Elizabeth II, better known as the QE2. He's been a lorry driver, a barman, he's worked as a forklift truck driver, and he lived in Ipswich at the time of the murders. His second marriage was to 32-year-old Diane Cassell, and that was at the Braintree Register Office in 1987. They divorced in 1988. They were only actually married for 11 months. And when I said earlier that he was a barman, he was also a pub landlord. And he moved around a bit when he was doing that. And at this time, he was a pub landlord in Norwich. But it was during his time as working as a pub landlord that he also managed a pub in South London. He lost this post due to gambling and heavy drinking. When you think about it, landlords shouldn't really drink because what they're doing is pouring the profits down their own throat. Unless they pay for it at the time, like throw the money in the till when they get a double whiskey off the optics. He was convicted in 2001 of theft after he stole £80 to pay off some debts. And he'd accrued very large gambling debts around this time. And at the end of the 1990s that is, he actually applied for bankruptcy. He filed for bankruptcy and he was declared bankrupt. He's twice tried to make his own way off the planet, if you understand my meaning. First by carbon monoxide poisoning in his car in 1994. Secondly, in 2000, by an overdose of pills. Both times, obviously, were unsuccessful. Sorry, shouldn't have said that. But you've got to smile, haven't you? Wright met a lady by the name of Pamela Wright, no relation, in 2001 in Felixstowe. And they moved to a house in Ipswich together in 2004. He's always openly admitted that he used prostitutes. He had done since his time in the Merchant Navy, and he continued throughout his adult life. In Ipswich, he actually conceded that he went to certain massage and sauna establishments, which turned out to be brothels. Who knew? During his trial, Steve Wright stated that he'd gone to professional prostitutes on many occasions, including 3 of the actual victims. Wright began having sex with prostitutes again when his partner began working the night shift, and their sex life became virtually non-existent. Bummer. Right, just before we go any further, I just need to say, there's certain things that you can't say on YouTube. They have a list of banned words. So you could be telling a story of somebody being raped, but you can't say rape. They're addicted to heroin, but you can't say heroin. You can't say cocaine. Do you see what I mean? Even the word drugs, they don't even like you using that word. I don't get paid for doing this, so I'm not as closely monitored as others that do this kind of work. But I like to abide by rules. So from here on in, I'm going to be very clever and use some silly phrases. Well, some of them are silly. Like, you can't say suicide. What? If someone commits suicide, they commit suicide. What else do you want to call it? Oh, right, he opted to take his body off the earth. No. And saying something as flippant as he topped himself, it's just not right. Do you get the idea? Okay, so we're going to be using some silly phrases. Hopefully you'll know what they mean. They'll be pretty self-explanatory. Between the 30th of October and the 10th of December 2006, so over 11 days, Steve Wright murdered 5 sex workers in Ipswich. Forensic evidence actually led to his arrest on the 19th of December, when tiny flecks of blood were found on the back seat of his Ford Mondeo. The tiny flecks of blood actually partially matched the DNA profile of one of the murder victims. Her name was Paula Clennell. Gemma Adams was 25 years old. She was born in Kesgrave and was living in Ipswich. She was last seen on the 15th of November at around 1:15 in the morning. Her body was found on the 2nd of December in a river in Hintlesham. She was the first of Wright's victims to be found. She was found naked, but she hadn't been intimately assaulted. As a child, Gemma had actually been a popular girl amongst her friends, and her family was quite affluent. But as a teenager, she started smoking cannabis, the devil's lettuce, and eventually started taking harder drugs, becoming addicted to the big H. She'd been working as a sex worker to cover the cost of her drug addiction. An addiction that had already cost her a really good job with an insurance firm when she got dismissed. Tania Nicol. She was 19 years old. Now, in legal terms, she's old enough to drink, she's old enough to vote, she can get married without permission, etc., etc. She's an adult. Just think of it another way. She's a teenager. She lived in Ipswich. She disappeared on the 30th of October, and she was reported missing on the 1st of November. Tania was found on the 8th of December, near Copdock Mill, in a river. There's no evidence of intimate assault. She was the first of the victims to be reported missing, but hers was the second body to be found. Tania was the youngest of the 5 victims. Like I said, she was only 19. And she'd been working as a sex worker to fund her addiction to the big H and what we will refer to as the devil's dandruff. Annette Nicholls was 29 years old. She was the mother of 1, and she was last seen on the 5th of December at around 9:50 p.m. Annette's body was found on the 12th of December near Levington, naked, but again not assaulted. Her body was posed in a cruciform position. I think you understand what that is. Hopefully. Annette was the oldest victim. She was the oldest victim. 29, she was the oldest victim. And she'd been a drug addict since the early 2000s. She was actually completing a college course, a beautician's course, at Suffolk College when she first started taking drugs. She soon took up the role as a sex worker to fund her addiction. Anneli Alderton, aged 24, a mother of one, and God love her, she was in the early stages of another pregnancy. She'd been living at a temporary address in Colchester, in Essex. Anneli disappeared on the 3rd of December. Now, CCTV is everywhere these days, in particular train stations and on trains and buses, but all public transport places basically. But the trains, most definitely. Camered up like you wouldn't believe it. So she was actually seen on the 5:53 train from Harwich to Manningtree on CCTV. She got off the train at Manningtree at 6:15 that evening before going on to Ipswich via another train, arriving at 6:43. So she was followed by CCTV until they couldn't see her anymore. Anneli's body was found on the 10th of December near Nacton, in Woodland, at the front of a school. Anneli had been asphyxiated, and she was found naked. And she was also posed in the cruciform position. Anneli had been addicted to drugs since shortly after her father's death from lung cancer in 1998. And she now walked the streets in order to fund that addiction. Right, so I'm going to kind of interject now with another little story. When all this was going on, I remember it well because I'm old. It was all over the news. It was all over the newspapers. Do you know what I mean? It was everywhere. I mean, at the point I'm talking about, 4 women had been killed in a week or just over a week in the same area, and that was pretty scary. I mean, it was a long way away from where I lived, but it was pretty scary. And one night on the local news, one of the reporters, I think he was from Anglian TV or Anglia News, and his report had actually been used on all the local radio, TV stations, TV news channels. So, sitting watching it, and he says to this lady that he's talking to, "Why are you out? Why are you out here? 4 people have been killed. 4 friends, basically, four girls doing what you do, have been killed." And she said, "Well, it's made me a bit wary about getting into cars, and I've got to work. I've got to. I need the money." We didn't see her face. She was filmed from the back of her head, and she used a different name. She used Kelly or Nikki or something like that. It was. And then the news hit that they'd found another body, or that somebody else had gone missing. And when we found out who it was all of a sudden, this was real. These weren't just 5 sex workers, these were human beings. Because we'd heard one of them talking. And that was the whole country. It was such a strange feeling. And it was like, oh my, that's the one that was on the interview on the news. Paula Clennell was 24 years old, and she was a mother of 3. She was born in Northumberland in the north of England, and she lived in Ipswich. She disappeared on the 10th of December. She was last seen at approximately 12:20 a.m. Paula's body was found on the 12th of December near Levington, on the same day as Annette Nicholls. She was found naked, but she hadn't been assaulted. And a post-mortem that she'd been reported that she'd been killed by a compression of her throat. Not asphyxiation, not strangulation, no, compression of her throat. Make of that what you will. I've got my own theories. Paula Clennell was the young lady that we'd heard talking on the news interviews. Her 3 children had been taken away from her previously due to her drug addiction. She herself had spent some time in care as a youngster, and it was shortly after being placed in care that she started taking drugs, and then she started walking the streets to fund her addiction. Steve Wright appeared before magistrates in Ipswich on the 22nd of December 2006. We have different levels of court in the UK. In Scotland it's different, but I think it was England, Ireland and Wales. I think we've got the same system. I could be wrong. You start off with a magistrate. They can only deal with like the smaller cases, theft, first offence drunk driving, stuff like that. So they deal with petty crimes. Although some of them might not seem so petty. Do you know what I mean? Especially if you've been burgled and it's your burglar that's up there in the box. But yeah, so they'll do the initial hearings on everybody. Doesn't matter what they've done. If they're not allowed to deal with it, it's then passed on to the next stage, which is Crown Court. And that's the judge with the silly wig and, and barristers and a jury. So Wright appeared before magistrates in Ipswich on the 22nd of December 2006, and he was remanded in custody. On the 2nd of January 2007, he appeared before Ipswich Crown Court and was remanded in custody again to appear before a court on the 1st of May. On May 1st, Steve Wright formally entered a plea of not guilty, and that so annoys me. They got forensic evidence and it's like, they go, oh no, wasn't me. Putting the families of murder victims or assault victims, or if you did it, hold your hands up to it, for God's sake. Don't put those families through the hell of reliving what's just happened to them. The judge indicated the trial will be heard at Ipswich Crown Court in January 2008, which it was on the 16th of January, with the prosecution opening their case, as is the norm. This was the first time that specific details were released to the public. Those details being the likes of the 2 girls being placed in the cruciform position, or all of the DNA evidence that they had against Steve Wright. Witnesses and all that stuff. It was in court when it was revealed. We didn't have court TV or anything like that in the UK. We do have now sometimes. So all of this, we had to wait for the court reporters to come out of the court, do the report to the papers. The papers, put it in print, but that's for the next day. And then on the evening news, you'd get like an update of what had gone on in the courts. And that's how we lived. Now, I sit watching court TV 14 hours a day. What a life. Sorry. The defence argued that Steve Wright was a frequenter of sex workers, and he'd had full sex with all of the victims at some point. Now, initially, he'd only had sex with 3 of them. Oh yeah, barring Tania Nicholls. Because he changed his mind with her. He picked her up with the intentions of having sex with her, and then changed his mind and dropped her back off in the red light district. Well, that was good of him, wasn't he? It contradicts his earlier statement when he was stopped by police in the red light district, because he said, I couldn't sleep. I was just driving around. I didn't realise I was in the red light district. Everybody knew he used prostitutes. His flat was round the corner. His flat was actually in the red light district. Duh. Why bother lying if it's so easy to find out that it's a lie? Or prove that you're lying? On the 21st of January, the jurors were taken to sites involved in the case. They were taken to Wright's flat. They only seen it from the outside, obviously. And then they were taken to the sites where the bodies were found, or the dump sites, as they're called, which I think is a horrible phrase. During the trial, the prosecutor, Peter Wright, no relation, suggested that Steve Wright may not have acted alone. Now, where he came up with this wonderful idea, I've got no idea myself. Because he said, the remains of Anneli Alderton were found some distance from the road, and there was no evidence that she'd been dragged by one person. So the fact that she was like, 100-pound dripping wet, and he was a big burly man, never even came into it. The fact that he could have picked her up, threw her over his shoulder, and just walked into the woods with her. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? The jury in the trial was the second group to be chosen for the task, because a member of the original jury of 10 men and 2 women had an illness which was prohibitive for the trial. Don't know what the illness was. It could have been the flu. You know what I mean? Whatever it was contagious. So they had a second jury, and that consisted of 9 men and 3 women. And after they'd all completed their questionnaires, do you know any of the victims? Do you know any of the witnesses? Do you know the suspect, etc.? They were chosen. The defence lawyer, Timothy Langdale, noted that the jurors had a particularly difficult task given the media coverage of the events. This is like, okay, all the jury are 5 years old, and it's like, you're going to have a really hard time distinguishing between what you're seeing in court and what you're seeing on your TV. Because the judge then said, well, actually, he ordered them to decide the case based only on the evidence presented in court. I would take severe umbrage if they spoke to me like I was a bloody 5-year-old. Steve Wright was found guilty of all 5 murders. He was found guilty on the 21st of February 2008 at Ipswich Crown Court. The following day, Mr. Justice Goss, the judge, sentenced Steve Wright to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he should never be released. Whole life term, life without parole, whatever way you want to put it, that's what he got. On the 19th of March 2008, Steve Wright appealed his conviction, or convictions, I should say, because there were 5. But on the 2nd of February, he became the bigger man and withdrew his application to appeal. Steve Wright was also investigated in connection with other unsolved murders and disappearances. Experts have highlighted how it is unlikely for any serial killer to start killing that late in life. He was 48 years old in 2006. And apparently, it's well known in, I don't know, whether it's psychologists, psychiatrists, that kind of genre, shall we say. Most serial killers will actually start killing before their mid-30s. So with that in mind, that indicates that Wright was likely to have killed before these 5 ladies. And the psychologists actually told police after the murders that it was highly likely that he had done so. Steve Wright is actually one of a number of high-profile murderers and sex offenders to have been identified as possible suspects in the Susie Lamplugh murder case. Susie was a British estate agent. She was reported missing on the 28th of July 1986 after leaving her place of work to go and meet with a potential client by the name of Mr. Kipper. And she was never seen again. Wright had actually worked with Susie on the QE2 during the early 80s. Susie was legally declared dead in 1994, but her body has never been found. However, the Metropolitan Police stated that this isn't really a strong line of investigation. Because in 2002, bear in mind that as far as anybody knows, Steve Wright didn't start killing until 2006. But Susie had gone missing in 1986. So the police actually said that it wasn't a very strong line of inquiry. Although, in 2002, the police named John Cannon as a man that they believed killed Susie. John Cannon had actually been jailed for a minimum of 35 years in 1989 for the rape and murder of Bristol newlywed Shirley Banks, along with a further sexual offence, an attempted kidnapping, and 2 offences of abduction with intent to engage in unlawful sexual intercourse. Plus, he always denied they had any connection whatsoever to Susie Lamplugh. He said he was having lunch with his mum the day Susie went missing. But his mum's got dementia, so they can't verify it. He actually became eligible for parole in September 2023, but it was refused. When I say became eligible for parole, he was given a life sentence. Actually, he was given 3 life sentences, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But he had to serve a minimum of 35 years. So after the 35 years, he became eligible for parole. Obviously, you have to apply for parole, so you have to meet with the parole board. And the parole board said, no. He currently resides in His Majesty's Prison, Full Sutton, in East Yorkshire. Not a very nice place. Cleveland Police, that's Cleveland, UK, not Cleveland, USA. Cleveland Police have not ruled out a link between Wright and the murder of a young lady by the name of Vicky Glass. She was a factory worker in Teesside who vanished from Middlesbrough in September 2000 and whose naked body was found in a brook on the North Yorkshire moors. In 2019, Wright was linked by an ex-police officer to the murder of Jeanette Kempton in 1989. Kempton had vanished from Brixton, near where Wright lived at the time, and was later found dead many miles away in a rural location in Suffolk. In July 2021, okay, this bit's complicated. It's not actually complicated, it's just really, really weird to say it. And I just hope you understand. Right, when somebody's already in prison, if they're suspected of another crime and the police want to interview them, they can go to the prison and have a chat, right? But if they're being interviewed under caution and all that kind of stuff, there's a full investigation going on, the police actually go to the prison with a warrant and arrest the inmate. The inmate is then taken away from the prison and is signed over into police custody, and at that point is no longer the responsibility of the prison service. When the police do what they've got to do, like they may say, okay, no, we need more time for this. We're not going to charge you, but you're being remanded in custody. Obviously, they've got to see a judge for that, but or a magistrate. So then they get taken back to the prison and given back to the prison service, and then they carry on their investigation. If the investigation comes to fruition and they charge the guy, or the inmate, I should say, because it happens to women too, then they'll go through the going to court dates and all that palaver all over again. But each time they finish, they'll be going back to the prison, like going home, because that's where their home is. So, in July 2021, Steve Wright was arrested at His Majesty's Prison, Long Lartin, on suspicion of murdering Victoria Hall, a 17-year-old who was murdered on her way home from a Suffolk nightclub in 1999. Her body was found in a ditch 5 days later. She was last seen alive in Felixstowe. Suffolk police reopened their investigation in 2019 after receiving fresh witness reports. They announced that Wright had been released under investigation pending further inquiries. So like I said, when they say released, he was actually sent back to the prison. Only 2 months after this, police announced a reinvestigation by a historical crimes unit into Vicky Glass's murder in order to pursue new lines of inquiries. On the 7th of December 2023, he was rearrested in connection with the murder of Victoria Hall and then taken back to the prison. He is yet to actually be charged with either of the murders. But hey, that was only what? Where are we at now? May 2024. It's only 5 months ago. Inquiries are still ongoing. It's took a while, but they're still ongoing. Wright has also been linked to the murders of other streetwalkers in Ipswich and nearby Norwich. When investigating the 5 murders committed by Wright in Ipswich in 2006, criminologist David Wilson, who was personally involved in the case, stated that he felt that the murders were too practiced in order for them to be done by somebody murdering for the first time. There was a cluster of sex workers murdered in Norwich in the years before 2006. 2. All have gone unsolved. Wright used to live and work in the city of Norwich, and he frequently returned to the city in the years after he left, usually travelling from Ipswich to Norwich at least once a month. He'd also ran a pub in the middle of the red light district in Norwich, similar to how he lived in the middle of the red light district in Ipswich at the time of the 2006 murders. In June 2012, Wilson actually said that the killer of Norwich sex worker Michelle Bettles was likely to be Wright. Now, this was in 2012, like I said. The police investigation responded to the suggested links between Bettles' case and Wright by saying that they'd found no evidence linking Wright to the case. It was revealed in 2019 that the police had already made an arrest in April 2003. Why didn't they tell us in 2003? Anyway, they arrested a man whose DNA matched samples from Bettles' body. The man admitted to have had sex with her, but 2 days before she actually disappeared. He said he was at home with a migraine when she disappeared, so it couldn't have been him. But when the police started looking into all the, the technological stuff that they do, tech stuff. They actually found that on the day that he said he was like really bad with a headache, really bad with a migraine, he was on the phone all day, all night, made loads of phone calls, but they couldn't see where they were coming from. They couldn't see where they were made from, only that he'd made them. I've got friends who suffer with migraine. They can't even open their eyes. Or if they think too loud, it hurts, that kind of thing. There's no way they'd be talking on the phone for hours if they've got a bad migraine attack. Anyway, I do ramble sometimes. You'll get used to it. On the 28th of March 2022, police announced that they've recovered further DNA profiles in Bettles' murder case, indicating that Wright can definitely be ruled out of the murder with forensics evidence. He'd previously been linked by criminal experts to the unsolved murder of Norwich sex worker Anneli Alderton in November 1992. She was last seen at night soliciting clients outside the Ferry Boat Inn, which was a pub. It was a pub that Wright managed. He ran it. It was his pub. Oh. And would you believe it was smack bang in the middle of the red light district? Police cross-referenced the DNA found on Pearman's body in 1992 to Wright's, but the results were inconclusive. However, in 2017, police announced that they now have a full DNA profile of the attacker, and that solving the case is simply a matter of matching the DNA to the individual. In other words, it's not Steve Wright, because if it was, they would have arrested him. Ipswich sex worker Amanda Duncan vanished after talking to a man in a car on Portman Road in 1993. That was a road that Wright was known to acquire his girls from, and from where some of his victims were actually known to have disappeared from in 2006. Steve Wright is currently abiding in His Majesty's Prison, Long Lartin, which is a Category A high security prison. The prison's located in a village. It's only little. It's one of them like blink in the card and you've gone through it and you didn't notice. Or South Littleton in Worcestershire in England. It currently holds around 600 men, 2/3 of whom are currently serving very long sentences. Thank you so much for allowing me to tell you this story, and thank you for listening, more's the point. If you found it interesting, please hit the like button, the little thumbs up thing. Hit the like button and consider subscribing. It doesn't cost you anything. It's totally and utterly free, and it just means that next time you go on YouTube, when you look at your little notification bell, if you've ticked that, there'll be notifications there to tell you that I've put a new video up. Which can't be a bad thing, really. Don't want you to miss anything. Especially at the end of every video, I give you a reason to smile. This time, just remember, you are somebody else's reason to smile. I've been Sue, TTFN.